welcome to Lunch With, our monthly webinar program where we have lunch with interesting individual guests, and sometimes, in this case, pairs of guests, talking about important areas of criminal justice. Today we're going to be having lunch with Shirley Debono and Donna Mooney from UNGRIP, that works on the issue of the imprisonment for public protection IPP sentence, and I'll introduce them a bit more in a minute. Before I do so, just a quick couple of reminders about the format of this program. First of all, if you want to pose a question or a comment to Donna or Shirley or both, then you can use the Q&A function. And if you like the question, you'll think it's definitely worth being asked, then if you use the upvote function, then it makes it more likely that we'll be able to pick it up and introduce it into the discussion. If you are on Twitter and feel like tweeting, then please do. We're encouraging people to use the hashtag #LunchWith. Okay, so on to the program itself. Shirley Debono and Donna Mooney are both part of the UNGRIP campaign. UNGRIP, the United Group for Reform of IPP, campaigns on behalf of prisoners and ex-prisoners serving the imprisonment for public protection sentence. Now, the IPP sentence is a prison sentence with no determined end date, meaning prisoners can be left languishing for years in prison. Even if they are released, they face the long shadow of at least a decade of supervision in the community, at risk of being returned to prison, sometimes for the most minor of infractions. Now, the IPP was abolished by Parliament in 2012 on the grounds that it was a significant injustice. And you would expect, actually, that there wouldn't be any people serving IPP sentences anymore. But the sentence was not abolished retrospectively. And as a result, thousands remain in prison under the sentence. And indeed, if nothing changes, we could still see 2,000 to 3,000 people serving IPP sentences a decade from now, so 20 years after the sentence was actually abolished. So it's a really important area of injustice in the current justice system. And I'm delighted to be joined by Shirley and Donna today. So if you'd like to get your cameras going, Shirley and Donna, and then we can start the discussion. See that, here's Shirley's microphone. Lovely. Great, well, look, welcome Shirley and Donna. It's a real delight to have you both here. Let's start, if we could start maybe with Shirley. Do you want to just tell us a little bit how you got involved in the campaign against the IPP sentence?
I got involved many years ago, around 2009. My own son was sentenced to a 2.5-year tariff in January 2006. And it wasn't until he had his parole hearing 2.5 years later and he didn't get out, I sort of convinced myself, well, maybe you're misbehaving, Sean, and they're going to make you do the full time. But then I looked into it and I realised, no, he's sentenced to a life sentence through the back door. They can't do this, you know. And I thought this had only happened to Sean at the time, because I still hadn't heard of the IPP sentence, even though he was serving it for 2.5 years. You know, the words was there, IPP, but I had no idea what it meant. So when I started looking into it and, you know, writing to politicians and Googling, and, you know, I was hitting a brick wall most of the time. But then as the months went on, I realised, oh, hang on a minute, there's thousands locked up on this, you know, and I go and visit Sean in the prison and he'd say, he's IPP, ma'am, he's IPP, he's IPP. And you realise they were everywhere. The prisons were overwhelmed with them. So that's what started my campaign off. I knew, you know, something had to be done about this. They can't, you know, we got to get it out there. So that's how it started off with my own son.
And has he now been released? And if so, when was that?
Sean was released just going into his 9th year. He was sentenced in January 2006, and he got out in the February 2014. That was a hard road for him, because the thing that was keeping him inside then was the courses, you know, not being able to complete all the courses. He did get out, and when they get out of prison, you think the sentence will end. You just think, oh, I got to behave myself, stick to all these rules, and you know, and the 99-year license, they don't comprehend it. You know, the time starts for some, as in Sean's case, when you get out of prison as well. It don't end, and that's in many cases of IPPs that's been released. They don't cope with the license conditions. And when you think Sean was released in 2014, his crime was committed in November 2005. He's been recalled 3 times, and not once for committing a crime. And it was only last week he was talking to me. He said, "Mum, do you know this license? I've been on it since 2014. It's a prison sentence. He described it as they're dragging him down, they're draining him, they're taking all his energy from him, leaving him feel like he's never going to have a life of his own. The probation officer is part of his life." You know, so it's not good.
So he was given originally a sentence with a tariff, you know, minimum period. He was expected to serve of 2.5 years. He spent 9 years in prison, and he was released in 2014. And I think, as I understand it, the earliest he can apply for the license conditions to be removed is therefore 2024.
Yeah. He got about another 2 years to go, but they are not going to take that license off him, because he's had 3 recalls. He's still under the umbrella of the probation, and I think maybe me and Donna can look into this. I don't think it's been looked into. Is that those that have the license conditions suspended, it used to be 4 years, it's now 5. For those to have the IPP sentence took off them altogether at the 10-year point, are these the ones that have the license suspended? Because Sean has never had it suspended, and thousands still haven't. So are these people not going to ever be able to get the license off them until there's, you know, they've been under these license conditions where they're suspended? So I don't know where we're going with that new thing they're bringing out. Or probation is going to inform all IPP prisoners that's been out for 10 years, you can apply to have your license taken off you. Could that be another mind bender for him? Like Sean, he knows he's not going to get it off him in 2 years' time. But there might be others that might not realise that and think they're getting this letter from the probation office. You can have your license taken off you. That's another knockback when they're told no. You know, they need to be told, we need to find out what are the conditions when they, you know, that they can have this license conditions taken off them altogether. Because I can see a massive hiccup there in the future.
And when you say that he's been recalled, so for those who aren't familiar with the language, basically in other words, he's been sent back to prison. How long, when he was recalled back to prison, how long was he spending in prison before he was able to get out again?
Around a year. Each time it's been around
each time a year.
Yeah.
So he's actually, in that sense, in 9. So that's basically he's served in prison so far about 12 years.
Yeah.
For what was originally meant to be a 2.5 year.
A street robbery of a mobile phone.
A street robbery of a mobile phone.
Yeah. No violence involved in that robbery. Right. And he actually gave the phone back to the man that he took it from. The man chased him. Sean stopped, turned around, gave the phone back, apologised, and ran off. The man actually phoned the police from the mobile phone that Sean Let's give back to him. And I don't condone what Sean did. He did deserve to go to prison. These victims are frightened when they're being ganged upon by, you know, like Sean, stopping someone in the street and threatening them and taking the phone off him, or, you know, it's frightening. So yeah, there are the victims as well, and we do think of the victims, but I now, they're not just the offenders now, all these people doing the IPP, they have now become victims themselves, and their families have become victims.
Donna, could I bring you in at this point? And I mean, again, same question. How did you become involved in this work?
I became involved in actual campaigning about 6 years ago when my brother died. He was given an IPP, and he told us about it. You know, I've been given a life sentence, and none of us believed him, because we were like, you wouldn't be given a life sentence for that. And he stole a car, and the guy's elbow got hurt in the process. And so we just kind of thought they wouldn't do that in this country. They wouldn't do something. I mean, that's unthinkable. And it was only after he died that I became aware he wasn't lying. He didn't misunderstand what sentence he was given. He was given a life sentence, and he was over tariff. He'd had 2 knockbacks. And he, the same as what Shirley was saying, really struggled to get on the courses, wasn't given the right support. He had a really big decline in his mental health because of that. And again, he was denied any mental health support right up until the end. And then he took his own life. And so kind of going through that process of him dying, and seeing and reading all the things that he went through, and like Shirley did, researching this whole IPP and the backstory and the people that were affected by it, I was horrified. And so I wanted to use the trauma and the grief to try and channel it into something positive, to try and get some change, and for my brother not to be just forgotten and just another number, and to try and hopefully stop other families going through what my family go through every single day. And, you know, I guess, yeah, that's kind of what brought me into it. You meet other families and other people who are experiencing the same thing or have gone through the same thing. And yeah, I guess you kind of just try and find a way to make people more aware of what's happening, and try and push for some change.
And how long, I mean, don't, you know, feel free to not, you know, share some information, because these are kind of difficult and, you know, personal things. That if you feel able to, how long was he originally sentenced to, and how long?
He was given a 4-year tariff.
He was given a 4-year tariff.
And he served 6. He'd just been given a knockback. And actually, I mean, when you look at most people on IPP, a lot of them who managed to stay alive have served far longer than that. I think for my brother it was just too much, and the fact that he'd been trying from day one to get onto the courses that he knew that he needed, that would have helped him actually. And he just couldn't do it. Files were lost for a year. He wasn't told about it. He was told he was dyslexic. He was told that his forms weren't detailed enough, so he wasn't accepted onto them. Given no support to fill these kind of things in. One moved and closed down. So he kind of had these things. So at each parole hearing, he was being told, well, you need to do these things to show us that you can be released. And he had tried every which way possible. He was well behaved, he was enhanced, he was, you know, trying his best to be a good citizen and do what he needed to do, and he couldn't. And for him, it just took its toll, because he couldn't see any other way out. He was moved to prisons that didn't offer what he needed. You know, I think a realization for me is that, you know, people don't choose where they're sent. They get sent, and that's it. And sometimes they don't know till the morning they're sent, you know. And so you know, I think for my brother Tommy, it took its toll on him. And after the second knockback where they said to him, you still need to do these things, his mental health it just took a nosedive. It absolutely, it's shocking, actually. I mean, it's not shocking that it happened, and knowing what the IPP does to people, but how quickly that happened for him. And he honestly, the only way he saw himself getting out of prison was dead. And that's why he did what he did. He took his own life because he couldn't see any other way out. He tried everything that he thought that he was being asked of him within his power to do, and he couldn't do that because he doesn't have that power. He didn't hold the power to choose where he went or to get on these courses, or, you know. And I think, like Shirley said, you know, I would never, ever, ever just, you know, there's no family I've ever met, and myself included, would ever, you know, say they should never be in prison. You know, they've done the crime, they do the time, totally, 100%, but that has to be proportionate to the crime they've committed. And if you want to give them a longer sentence, then give them they need an end date. Like, it can't be a never-ending date, and that's essentially what happened to my brother and many other people on the sentence.
And it's a really kind of sort of Orwellian situation where you're given a sentence, you're told you will be released. We'll judge you safe for release when you do course A, B, and C, or whether you show some, you know, 1, 2, and 3 changes in behaviour. But then you're not provided with the sort of the courses or the support in prison in order to demonstrate, you know, to kind of pass the test, as it were. So it's a really kind of, I mean, it's a sort of form of, you know, kind of institutional cruelty. It's almost the kind of the state as the bad parent, as it were, you know, disciplining the child, but not giving the child the opportunity to demonstrate that they're, you know, that they've, you know, sorted out their behaviour.
I think that's the thing as well. I know this is the same for many people, but it was for my brother. It's very difficult to be in one of the most dangerous places and be not get into trouble, not get involved in things, to try and be the best that you can be, and to still be penalised for that. And then to still say to someone that we're still not going to release you. You know, at what, you know, at some point, everyone's going to give up. They're going to say, well, what's the point of trying? Because I've tried everything I meant to try, or I've been asked to try, or, you know, and I think that's essentially what happened to my brother, and he's not alone in this. So
now, just moving on a little bit, and staying with you, Donna, for a minute. Both you and Shirley have kind of, in a sense, told a similar story, that, you know, they were given this prison sentence, and actually I kind of almost didn't think that much of it, and then the penny dropped when, you know, a few years later when they weren't being released, and then I suddenly found there's this really, as Shirley put it, it's basically a life sentence. I hadn't realised it was. There is a lot more awareness now about these issues, not least of all, obviously, amongst prisoners and their families and friends. So, and UNGRIP has been an important part of that story of you know, increased awareness, though I know not the only part of it. So tell us a little bit about, as it were, the kind of the story of the growing campaign against this sentence. How did sort of UNGRIP come about? What were the kind of some of the main sort of steps to its establishment?
So I think obviously, you know, I think when you're a family member involved in this scenario, you meet other family members, and within the campaigning, and after my brother died, I kind of became part of many Facebook groups and so on and so forth, and I got to know Shirley from that. And so kind of from that, we would touch base about things that we were doing and so on and so forth. And one of the first steps kind of us doing things publicly together was the Forgotten. So we set the Forgotten up because we felt like there was this thing that families are so, and people on the IPP are so frightened to share their stories publicly because of the repercussions that can happen, and they don't have any control over that, both if their loved ones are in prison or outside of prison. And so we set up the Forgotten as a platform for families and people with an IPP to share their stories. anonymously, and then kind of from that grew Ungrip, which essentially was a space for, or is a space that holds all the information. Because I think you know what you've got lots of people doing lots of different things, great things in different places. There's media going out, there's things happening in Parliament, and so it was never in one place. And so, you know, we kind of, a group of us decided that we needed that. And so Ungrip was that space where, you know, you kind of combine all the information in one place, so that if people want to use that to kind of reinforce with the work they're doing, they know where to go and find that. But also as a space to, if there is actions being taken, that gives families a tool to access, or anyone really, not even families, anyone who wants to get involved, access those tools to go and do something. And one of those things has actually panned out to be things around parliamentary debates and stuff like that. And so, and kind of that's how it kind of developed. I think I'm sure Shirley will agree with this. Ungrip kind of took off more than we expected it to, actually, and has grown more than we expected it to. So, you know, I think it kind of, you know, which is great. I think it's being accessed by a lot more people than we expected it to as well. But that's essentially how it was born. Yeah.
And Shirley, I mean, you originally, of course, I guess, you know, for you it was about Sean and about the tenants he had, and then obviously you were identifying that there are a number of other people in the same situation as you and Sean and others. So do you want to sort of add anything to what Donna was just saying about that kind of, you know, that move from, as it were, lots of individuals who are experiencing the same thing and then sort of coming together and kind of forming a, you know, something approaching the beginnings of a movement for change?
Yeah, like when me and Donna first came together, we were sharing information, we were researching, Googling, and we were sharing it. You know, I think eventually we realised that we need to get it out there bigger. And this is, like Donna said, families needing to get their stories out there and afraid to get their stories out there. So yeah, we created the Forgotten page, which is fantastic. People are able to tell their stories on there, you know, anonymously. And you know, and I think the Ungrip was born through that then as well. And like Donna said, it's becoming overwhelming now. Like she said, we didn't expect it to become so big in such a short space of time. So yeah, people are out there and they're hearing us now. They're hearing the campaign is getting out there, and you know, this is what it's all about. Getting people to know that there's a sentence that was brushed into the carpet for so many years, and between Ungrip and the Forgotten page, you know, and you know what I'm doing now and the separate thing, it's all getting pulled from under the rug. And you know, maybe we can have some hope that it's being pulled from under the rug, and we will get justice one day through doing what we're doing as a campaign groups. You know, I've created a page now called IPP in Action. So, you know, when we're all together with the families as well, just getting involved, I think, yeah, you know, it's being pulled from under the rug at last.
Now, the sentence was, I think, originally became, you know, it was introduced, I think, in an act in 2003, and became available to the courts a few years later. Then almost kind of fairly quickly on there, I think there was a recognition that this wasn't quite, this didn't quite go according to what we were expecting. Indeed, the former Lord Chief Justice said as much to the House of Commons Justice Committee late last year, where he said, yeah, it was obvious within months there was a problem. And we saw a little bit of a kind of a tweak in legislation a few years later, and then it was abolished as a sentence, at least for new sentences, and we'll come back to the implications of that for those serving it, in 2012. So, I mean, that's the kind of, Shirley, how did you, can you remember when the sentence was abolished in 2012?
Yeah,
and what were your
all over the place looking for it. Yeah.
Your feelings at the time when it was abolished? Because Sean would have still been in prison at that point, wouldn't he?
Oh, when it was abolished, we're thinking, yeah, they're going to abolish it, they're going to abolish it, but they didn't retrospectively. So there was that relief that it's not going to be dished out anymore. It's abolished, and you know, they're not going to dish it out anymore. But we still we're still fighting today to try and get justice. So when you're thinking, right, it's abolished back then in 2012, you're thinking, right, let's get on right into these politicians, let's try and get justice, you know, get families involved and stuff like that. And looking back now, back then, we didn't know we'd still be here in 2022 trying to get it abolished. We didn't foresee all these years ahead of us. We didn't foresee, you know, all these IPP prisoners that are, you know, losing their minds, being taken to, you know, transferred to mental health hospitals. We didn't foresee that there would be all these deaths through all these years. We really thought that the government would have seen sense many years ago and did something retrospectively for these IPP prisoners. And at first, in the early days, before I knew Donna, it was hard trying to fight this IPP sentence because a lot of it, I mean, I had an MP at the time, her name was Jenny Willett, and she was totally lock and throw away the key. So if you were, if your MP was like lock and throw away the key, there's no one else to turn to in the early days because you're still learning about this IPP sentence, and you're like, you're having, you know, you're trying to, you know, it was hard. But as the years have gone by, a lot of these MPs are realising, you know, through their constituents, it's getting, you know, informing them about their loved ones on the IPP. And when they're learning about it, they're coming on board. And especially since the UNGRIP, you know, have come about, people can now send a link to the UNGRIP to their MPs with their stories. And so the UNGRIP campaign have done fantastic in that way as well, because it's making MPs think, oh, hang on a minute, I haven't just got a story here of an individual IPP. It's here, there's thousands, and you know, and they've learned so much. So we have brought a lot of MPs on board through that sort of campaigning along the years, but it just wasn't about years ago. So it's been a long campaign. So I'm hoping that 2022, this year, we're not going to be 10 years down the line looking back on this year thinking we're still in the same boats. It can't go on. It's got to stop.
And one of the things, of course, on the horizon at the moment is that the House of Commons Justice Committee is doing an inquiry, and I want to come on to talking a little bit about that in a moment. But before we do so, let's just maybe kind of take stock of the current situation as it is. And we have a question here on the chat. Why was the change of policy not made retrospective? Was this just stupid oversight, or did they try to justify this? Donna, I'm just kind of wondering whether you have some thoughts on that question specifically, but also kind of where you now see, as it were, the kind of the current situation as being more generally. But first, on that retrospective abolition, why didn't MPs just?
I think, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly why. I think we all have our opinions on it. I know that Ken Clark, who initially abolished it, said that he wanted to do it retrospectively, but he was taken out of post before he could do that. Whether that is accurate or not, I don't actually know. But to be honest, my personal opinion is it's very political. There are no votes in releasing people in prison, and MPs know that. And if they do that, they worry that backlash that they would get, because there are some places in the media that wouldn't be honest about that change, and they would probably pitch it as all these dangerous people being released, which is not true. You know, but I think that is my perspective, is that's the fear, and that's why they won't do it. And I think also now, because not for everyone, but for a lot of people on this sentence who've been kept in prison for so many years over their tariff, it's affected their mental health so severely that they need real mental health support. And so that the other factor is they probably don't want to spend money doing that, despite it probably saving them a lot more money releasing people, but they don't want to probably spend some of that money giving people the support that they actually should be given, that's been caused by poor policy. So that's kind of, you know, my opinion on it. But as I said, I don't think you'll ever really know the true reason, because MPs won't ever tell you that. Yeah. So.
And the architect of the sentence, David Blunkett, has become a bit of a kind of a latter-day convert to sort of something approaching fairly radical reform, though he still kind of says, oh, it's sort of needed in some circumstances, more or less, I think, is his position. But what do you kind of make of David Blunkett's kind of, as it were, journey to recognition that there's something fundamentally quite bad about what he introduced?
I think Shirley's probably done a lot of work on that too.
Shirley, maybe, yeah.
David Blunkett and getting him there.
David Blunkett has been behind me for a lot of years, around 8-9 years now, with the campaign, and I think sometimes he's hitting a brick wall, the same as us. You know, he's trying. He's accepted total responsibility, you know, and he believes that this IPP sentence must be gone. He's just behind us in this campaign, and like I said, his thoughts are it wasn't implemented properly, and if he hadn't known about the way things were going before it was implemented, that there wouldn't have been the monies, the resources and all this and that wasn't being implemented, I believe he wouldn't have implemented that until he knew exactly that when people got sentenced to, say, a 2-year tariff, that all the courses would be there for them to go in front of the parole board and prove that they were safe for release. But as we said, it didn't happen, and I don't think Lord Blunkett foreseen that either at that time. Yeah.
I think Shirley's totally right. I think, you know, I don't think anyone would have implemented something like this if they'd known what was going to happen. And I'm sure that knowing that you were part of implementing something that's had such horrendous outcomes for thousands of people and their families, anyone with any ounce of empathy will find that hard to live with. So
the trouble is as well with all these courses, and they've known for many years it's the resources, and they have to complete these courses, and we're now in 2022, and the government, as far as I'm concerned, they've got no intentions of making sure that an IPP can have access to this and access to that, because if they did, that since, you know, they would be completing these courses now, and they are still to this day in the wrong prison, or they get to the high up the queue, they think they're next, and then they're being sent to another prison, and so they're right down the bottom of the list again. And it's happening all the time, and nobody seems to be accountable for what's going on here, and it's a massive problem. And while all this is going on and they're still stuck in prison for another year, their mental health is deteriorating so bad, so that, you know, even for those that's being recalled, when they're getting recalled, there might not be the courses there for them. And the scary part is now, after all these years, as with me with Sean, if he was to be recalled now, and we're looking for a recall, he's never been out more than 2 years before a recall, and we're on the edge of that, and we're frightened that if he's recalled again, they're going to get a psychologist to see him, or a psychiatrist, because he's been recalled so many times and he's done that 9 years. And are they going to throw all that at him and say, right, and diagnose him with something that he haven't really got wrong with him? So this is coming down on us like a big massive weight, yeah. And so they're being kept, he could be kept in prison for that reason. No courses, then people recalled, they're frightened of that happening to him, because they are throwing psychologists, it's a lot of them, you know, diagnosing them with, you know, even changing around diagnosis from bipolar to split personality disorder when they've been, you know, fine on their bipolar, medication, fine, great on it, and all of a sudden they're put onto something else. So I don't know, I just think even recall prisoners now are going to find themselves in longer and longer, where Sean had been lucky and got out in the 12-month each time on them 3 recalls. If he's recalled again, I predict he's going to be in for at least 3 years. And that's honest.
And I think on that point, like the whole idea about what's happening now, I mean, you hear the Ministry of Justice, you know, the statements always, well, we're improving things, and MPs, some MPs, you know, we're improving things. The release, the unreleased rate is dropping. In my opinion, it's not dropping quickly enough, especially when you've got, I think it's over 300 people who are over 10 years over tariff, or more than 10 years. So you're looking at 15 and 16 years even for some of those. But actually, when you look at the recall rates, that's almost on par with the release rates. And what you're ending up with is actually, from probably this point forward, there's going to be no significant change in the IPP prison population going forward, because people are being recalled so quickly. And we're talking about people being recalled for not committing a crime. I think 70% of those recalls are released on first hearing, and that would suggest that actually they wouldn't have accessed any courses or any extra rehabilitation while in prison. They're just being recalled for really unnecessary things that could have been managed in the community, and they're not. And so, you know, when you look at kind of where things are and how it's pitched that actually it's a success, no change to me is not a success. And on top of that, you're looking at increasing deaths, increasing suicides. All of these people who are now dying, either through suicide or natural deaths, are going to be over tariff now. Like, they're dying in a place that they shouldn't even be in, you know.
And there was a question in Parliament just the other day on this from David Blunkett about the numbers of prisoners who'd died while serving an IPP, and the figures were, I mean, I was a bit shocked by the figures, but you know, I think the answer that was given was that there had been 231 prisoners who died while serving an IPP sentence in prison, died in prison.
Well, we've got
of which 30% had taken their own lives. But I think, yes, Shirley or Donna, I think there's some question mark about whether those figures are accurate.
They're not accurate. I know for a fact that those numbers are inaccurate. I've had this conversation before. Lucy Fraser went publicly and said that they'd got numbers wrong previously and they changed them. That's recorded in parliamentary question. Those numbers are wrong. There's been 242 people die on an IPP, and 71 of those are by suicide. And that's not including people who've died on day release in prison on an IPP. You know, they don't include those, even though they're living in the prisons, they don't include those people in those numbers. So it's actually even higher than that. And as a family member who's had a loved one die on this sentence, that just shows how much little regard there is for people on this sentence, to not even do the bare minimum to ensure that actually, if you are sharing this information, it's accurate, you know.
Yeah. Sorry, Shirley, did you want to say something on this as well?
Yeah, I wanted to mention Jamie Turner. His son has said that I can mention his name and get it out there. Jamie Turner had been directed for release to approved premises. I think he should have been out by November, December, or something like that, Donna. But then they gave his bed away, so he didn't have no bed. So then he had to stay in prison longer. So they found another bed in a hostel place for him. Now, while that's going on, Jamie had been found passed away in his cell. Now, had the probation officer not failed Jamie in the first place, Jamie would have been in a hostel, yeah? And Jamie would have had his family around him, or if he was feeling unwell, a doctor called, you know, so he would have had all the help. But he was in a prison cell and he died alone. And you know, that's when you're letting these prisoners down, like not taking their own lives, the sentence itself, the knockbacks, it can make them feel so ill, bring on so much stress, you know, that they die young, they die in their 40s, their 50s, you know, because it's the IPP sentence that's killing them. And especially when they have a knockback like that, you're directed for release, whether it's to a hostel or home. That's where you should be going. No excuses. You know, it's the same as there's another young man that I'm in touch with. He had his parole hearing and everything's going great, and he should have been released to a hostel. But why didn't he get released to a hostel? Because probation had not took the sentencing plan to the parole hearing. So now he's in prison for another, however long. They're indeterminate prisoners, you know. So, and you can't have these mistakes. And also in his parole dossier, they had files from another prisoner, adjudications that another prisoner had committed in his file. And prisoners, IPP prisoners, when this, and I found out this is happening a lot because I'm in touch with these people. One was knocked back in November because of the same situation. This one's knocked back. They're all getting knocked back because maybe it's another massive reason why they have to deal with this sentence, because the probation cannot cope. They're overwhelmed with these IPP prisoners. Parole boards are trying to release them as quickly as they can, and then they're getting recalled just as quick because probation can't manage them. They cannot manage them. They can't even manage their files without putting someone else's adjudications in there, you know. And it's just the whole system is a failure, the whole system, and this got to stop.
Let's just get a kind of a sense of the numbers we're talking about. So broadly speaking, how many people are currently in prison serving IPP sentences, and how many, to the best of our knowledge, are in the community
in total,
post-release? Yeah.
In total, there's 2,962 people serving an IPP in prison.
1,000.
2,962.
Okay.
That's including those on recall.
Right.
So the unreleased population who've never been released is 1,602, and 96% of those are over tariff. Right. I think it's in the 300-400 are 10 or more years post tariff, up to 16 for some.
And roughly, do we know how many are actually in the community serving post-release supervision?
No, it's hard to get those numbers because, I mean, these numbers don't include those in secure hospitals, which is over 2,500. I think it's, I can't remember the exact number. I don't know if Shirley remembers, it's about 245, 275 at the moment. People who've been returned to different countries, people who've died in the community, people who've died in secure hospitals, like none of that information is collected. So it's hard to know exactly how many are in the community. I think at the last count, 4 people had managed to reach the 10-year point to get off of the license conditions. Out of, I think, almost 9,000 out of 9,000 people, 4 people have managed to do that. Bearing in mind how long the sentence has been going for, pre-abolition and post, that's pretty appalling in my eyes.
Let's just pick up on a few questions and observations coming in on the Q&A. So there's one here. Having worked in the prison service, the whole justice system is highly risk averse. Retrospective abolition was too frightening a prospect to politicians. I've always been saddened that the risk to the IPP person is not really factored in the same way. Tragic and cruel. Thank you, David, for those thoughts. There's also a kind of questions, a couple of questions of a similar nature. One from Vicky: how does the current indeterminate sentence differ to IPP? And then Jenny is kind of built on that, saying, I joined the cause as I believe my brother had IPP for years, to then find they were in discretionary life sentence, both of which just destroy a person piece by piece, as you watch from afar. And Shirley, you were kind of saying that you'd kind of sort of realized that, you know, Sean had effectively been given a kind of a life sentence by another route. You know, it was a kind of, not quite the same thing, it's not called a life sentence. And I'm just wondering whether, you know, whether either of you kind of looked at this kind of relationship between the IPP sentence and the other kind of indeterminate sentence, in other words, the life sentence, which both can be mandatory in the case of murder, but there's also a number of offences where you can get what's called a discretionary life sentence. My sense is that sometimes IPP sentences of prisoners have just been thrown into that same kind of bundle and treated in the same way. Is that right?
Yeah, the indeterminacy of the IPP sentence is, it's awful, because, you know, those that had such a low tariff, there are those that may have got sentenced to like those discretionary sentences with maybe a higher tariff. I'm just sort of IPP. I look into IPP. I'm not really looking into the new sentences that they brought out, because there's so much to do here, you know, concentrating on what we're doing here. But even those long sentences, you know, determinate long sentences, I still think maybe that there's sentences that need to be, you know, looked into, because the long tariffs that these people are getting, is, again, it's going to affect their mental health. You know, for when they're released, they're not going to be the same again. Because I think even them sentences are not proportionate to the crime they may have committed. I mean, we've always been a sort of fair justice system here. If you committed the most horrendous, horrific crimes, there's the detention for life sentence out there for people like that. And then you've got a life sentence for those, you know, that committed manslaughter, all those high end of the scale crimes, but they was about a tariff. But since, you know, but the tariffs have gone up and up and up. It's, you know, how can I put it? They may as well as be sentenced to, including IPPs that's never getting out, sentence them all to, you know, to a detention for life, is that, because that's what it feels like, because there's no way out. And you know, it's just, I just think the whole justice system needs an overhaul. Everything, the long sentences, you know, it's quite frightening. If they was to get rid of this IPP sentence tomorrow, and I've thought about this, and Sean went out and committed another crime, yeah, is he going to be sentenced to like a life sentence with a very high tariff, because with the IPP sentence that is, say, abolished, used against them? That's concerning for me as well. Could they ever use it for future sentencing? So enabling these IPP prisoners to get another long, lengthy sentence inside. So yes, it's all scary, even the life sentences.
I do think that, I think as well, like, I think, you know, it's been, a lot of people have talked about that IPPs were given this sentence and they were chucked in with all you know, all the life, you know, that's kind of how they were viewed, as in the lifers and so on and so forth. But I think, you know, I think the point is about the IPP is that, one, these people who were given it were often on much lower tariffs. The other thing is it's been abolished. So you're saying to people, we're keeping you in prison on a sentence that's no longer around because it shouldn't have been implemented the way that was in the first place, but we're still going to punish you in the same way. And I think maybe when you look at like the self-harm and the suicide and the mental health rates around people on an IPP sentence, it's so much higher than any other sentence. And I think it's because of that nature. You know, you're telling people those factors. One, well, you might not have done something as bad as other people, but you're going to be put in that same group, again, with no resources and no extra funding to support them to get out. We're also going to abolish the sentence you were given because it was unjust, but we're going to keep you on it, and we're still not going to let you know when you get out. And I think all of that, you know, in evidence that's been talked about again and again, shows that it traumatizes people, you know. And I think Dr. Morganti referred to that in some evidence he gave, that the mental health issues you see in a lot of people who are given an IPP are similar to those people who were given a sentence when they hadn't committed the crime. And no one's saying that people on IPP haven't, but what has happened is you're saying the sentence they were given is no longer allowed to be implemented. It was unjust, but you're still going to be kept in it. And you're still going to suffer in the same way and face those same issues. You know, I think that is the biggest, that's probably one of the main reasons why you see those issues, those mental health issues around people who are on this sentence more than any other sentence, because of that. And I think people are very good at saying, I did this and I deserve this sentence or this crime. I don't think I've ever spoken to an IPP who ever said to me, I didn't deserve to go to prison. You know, they know they did, but it should be fair and it should be proportionate to what the crime was.
Let me just read out one of the comments on the chat. My partner is currently serving an IPP and is 11 years over tariff. He was originally given a 2.5-year sentence in 2008. This year would be his 14th year, and he has been in 27 prisons. He's due parole this month. I've written to David Blunkett and got a reply apologising and wishing for his release. He now has Dean Kingham as a solicitor. He's a very good solicitor, I hasten to add. He now has Dean Kingham as solicitor representing him on his next parole. We're hoping for straight release. Over the last year, he's been so down with his mental health, and myself and his family are so worried that if he gets another setback, he will try and end his life. As his words, I've had enough. I mean, this is such a kind of, I sense this is such a kind of a common experience for both prisoners and family members, and kind of in a sense, it's not just the prisoners who are in that sense serving the sentence, it's the family members as well. With that, I don't know if Shirley or Donna, you've got any thoughts?
I guess when I hear the stories, I do get emotional. I can't help myself. I do get emotional, so I'll leave that one with Donna in a moment.
I'm going to cry too, Shirley. Obviously, like, it's the families that serve it all the time, and not only when their families are alive, but when they're no longer alive, because you live with that. And so the same as Shirley, like when I hear that, and we speak to people all the time, we get letters from people all the time who tell us that I can't do this anymore, I'm going to take my life. And it's so distressing, and it's distressing as people who have other loved ones who either were on the sentence or on it, but it's also distressing to know that this is still going on, and that change can happen, but people are choosing not to do that, and it's pushing people to that extremity. And again, you know, I say this again and again, like, the families are victims of this now, because we suffer with those people, with our loved ones, being whether they're here or not here. You know, that affects us too. And you know, and so when you look at kind of the how far the vein goes with this, it runs so far down the line. It doesn't just stop with me or my children, or so the same, or like this person's brother, his family, the sister, her children, or, you know, it goes so far. This damage runs so far, and it makes me so cross, because it could so easily be stopped, and it's not.
Yeah.
And it should be.
There's a question here from Vicky. It comes down to whether we are punishing or rehabilitating. To continue to move the goalposts or prevent rehabilitation is simply inhumane. Have any reports or surveys been carried out as to the lack of access to courses, etc., to prove the lack of availability to fulfil parole criteria? Now, this has been one of the things that the Justice Committee has been looking at, and you know, both you, Donna and Shirley, both of you gave evidence actually to the committee last year, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts and reflections on, you know, kind of what, in a sense, what you're expecting from the committee, or what you're hoping from the committee, which aren't necessarily the same things, of course. Shirley, do you want to offer some thoughts on that?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't know what I'm expecting from the committee. It's like I know what to expect from the committee in one sense. It's what are we expecting from the government? Is the frightening part. So until we get a response from the government, I tend to shut off from it, because it's the disappointments, you know, it's the disappointment of it all. Even though we give evidence, and it's like I gave the evidence of my son when he was recalled to approved premises, and we had the phone call the same night to come and collect him from there. So my evidence is, if he was to be recalled into a prison, he would have still been in there for a whole year. So that in itself should be evidence that that particular recall was unfair, and a classic example as to what's going on within, you know, the probation system and the recall system. But yeah, I'm a bit like, I'm not holding any hopes up for any outcome, even from the government, because I think any changes that they're going to make is just tinkering around the edges. It's not going to help those that's in prison that have never got out one little bit. They're in there, they're languishing, and you know, I don't know. I'm just going to wait and see what the government comes out with before I respond to any of it.
Would you agree, Donna? I mean, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't ever kind of second guess what's going to happen. I think if we did that, we would have hoped there would have been some more significant change in the Houses of Parliament with a recent parliamentary bill that went through where very little was done. I would hope that the Justice Select Committee heard all the evidence, not just from myself and Shirley, but all the evidence they got from people who wrote into them, sharing their experiences, which actually is quite a traumatic thing to do anyway. I think when you revisit any of this stuff, it's hard for all of us, particularly those who are still, you know, serving the sentence. So I'd hope that they would take that evidence and actually make some strong recommendations. But I think, like Shirley said, you don't know what's going to happen, even if they did do that. You know, are the government actually going to take, you know, actually do something significant about it and stop tinkering around the edges and make a significant change to undo this properly? You know, ultimately we would like resentencing, but I think we all know that that's quite unlikely to be recommended or even be implemented by the current government, even if it was recommended. But that would be my hope, that would be the thing that would happen, because that is the safest and fairest option and way to fix this. But I think, like Shirley said, we just have to wait and see. And I just want to kind of, on the back end of what she said about this hope, it's true, you know, all of us go into this, we're doing this in the hope that something actually changes. And every time something doesn't change, it's really hard. It's not only hard for us who are out there fighting it and doing it, it's hard for those who are serving it, because it gives them that tiny little bit of hope that something might happen, and then it doesn't, it just dashes it, and it, you know, it will be affecting people. So I do hope the Justice Select Committee understand that and make some strong recommendations, and also take into consideration the strong evidence that they've been given, not just by people who are affected by it, by professionals too. It's not just coming from an emotive, you know, direction from people who are emotionally involved. It's coming from professionals who are involved too, who understand it in a different, you know, in a different way.
Steve suggests that maybe ask whether there's maybe a human rights legislation route for addressing these. Jenny mentions, you know, the role of probation. There's also a point here by Suzanne about psychological courses and availability. Lisa about risk assessments. There's a number of kinds of, as it were, technical and specific ideas about things. But in the few minutes we have left, you know, Shirley and Donna, just some kind of quick thoughts about, you know, how do we sort this out? I mean, how do we actually ultimately get to a point where people are not in this ridiculous and really traumatic situation of being imprisoned in a sentence?
I think we need more public awareness.
Right.
We need loads of people. The public do not know about the IPP sentence still, so we need more public awareness. Even, you know, just public awareness. Something has got to change. There is going to be, am I allowed to mention the protest? There's going to
please
be
please do, yes.
There's going to be a protest outside Downing Street on the 27th of April from 11 a.m. in the morning until whatever time people want to leave. We're going to march on to Parliament and to lobby our MPs. So my advice to anyone that wants to lobby their MP on that day is to contact your MP now and advise them that you're going to be lobbying them on the afternoon of the 27th of April. There'll be a hall booked within the Parliament, and everybody that goes there to lobby their MPs will be able to put their loved one's case in that meeting. And it's a massive choice, it's a chance to get it out there into the public domain on that day. There'll be loads happening on that day. Bring a packed lunch, bring plenty of water, bring something warm. We don't know what the weather's going to be like at the end of April, so bring an umbrella and just make it a fun day to enjoy on the way to getting justice and public awareness and everything we can. We got to do this through action as well. So
Thank
yeah,
you, thank you, Shirley. And we can certainly circulate the details of that parliamentary lobby in the follow-up emails. And Donna, any kind of final thoughts from you about getting sort of, as it were, significant change in this area?
I think on the back end of what Shirley's doing, which I think is great. I think go and educate yourself, have a look at the UNGRIP website, share that with other people, and keep an eye on that, because I think if there are other actions that people can take, will sometimes be on there, not always, but I think, educate people, because I think that's the other thing, like there's a massive, like Shirley said, a lack of awareness, and also a massive lack of understanding about what the sentence is and how terrible it is. And I think, UNGRIP, the website shows that in a way that is easier to understand for people. So talk to people about it, share information about it, the more public awareness, the better. And if people really feel like it, write to your MPs about it and ask them what they're doing about it.
Thank you very much. We're out of time. These discussions always just kind of go in a blink of an eye, and this one was I find particularly kind of difficult conversation to have, because there's for all the reasons that we've discussed. So I'd really like to thank Donna and Shirley for sharing as much as you have. It's a really kind of an outrageous situation, and the sooner that it's brought to an end, the better. Thank you also to all those who've attended today and supported this particular programme, and all the questions as well. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. It's great to see them coming in. Our lunch with next month on the 16th of March will be with Gloria Morrison and Jan Cunliffe of JENGBA, talking about another actually conspicuous injustice in the justice system, the joint enterprise prosecutions and convictions. But until then, thank you very much for joining us today, and hope to see you at our next lunch with. Thank you.